Hello to all our televiewers and subscribers. I am Mrs. Valerie Cruz Ocampo, Senior High School Teacher 2 of Cesar E. Vergara Memorial High School, your teacher presenter for this episode of DepEdR Teleturuan. As human beings, we always communicate. We spend most of our waking hours in communicating. Even in silence, we are still transmitting a message to people around us. Therefore, knowing how communication works seems a very important thing to know. So, this day's lesson will be about various communication models. After the lesson, you are expected to be able to differentiate the various models of communication. This lesson is under the subject Oral Communication in Context, one of the core subjects in senior high school. But before we proceed with our main topic, let us first have a short recap of what communication is and its elements. Communication is the transmission of ideas and emotions between or among persons with the use of verbal and nonverbal cues. The different elements of communications are participants, the sender and the receiver, context, the message, the channel, and the feedback. With that, let us now proceed to our lesson. Our lesson for today is about various communication models, namely linear communication model, interactive communication model, Osgood and Schramm model, transactional model, and helical model. These models of communication will help us understand the process of human communication. Let's start with the linear communication model. The linear communication model presents communication as a one-way activity in which information flows from the sender to the receiver. This process shows only a passive receiver. Feedback is not a requirement, and the role of the receiver is only to accept information. An example of this is listening to the radio. In listening to broadcast media, the flow of communication is only one way. The receiver of the message does not need to provide the sender with feedback. The next one is the interactive communication model. It shows a two-way activity. The sender and the receiver have the same role in the activity. Either one comes up with an idea, sends a message, and reacts to the concept. The model involves feedback, an element missing from the linear communication model. It may also include noise, an element that affects the interpretation of the message. An example of this model is telephone conversations. When two people are talking on the phone, both are required to speak and respond to each other's message. Showing the same elements as the interactive communication model, our third model is the Osgood and Schramm model. It presents communication as an endless circular flow of conversations. The model emphasizes that the functions of speakers or participants in the communication are encoding, decoding, and interpreting. The speaker encodes the message, the listener decodes it and interprets it. After interpreting, the listener then becomes the speaker. He encodes another message to provide feedback and continue the conversation. An example of this model is class recitation. When a teacher asks a question, a student is expected to interpret the message and respond. The teacher then gives a follow-up question and the discussion continues. The fourth model is what we call transactional model of communication. It is the exchange of messages between the sender and the receiver where each takes turns to send or receive messages. Here, both sender and receiver are known as communicators, and their role reverses each time in the communication process as both processes of sending and receiving occurs at the same time. The noise and the environment are other elements that affect the process. The noise is any distraction that affects the interpretation of message. An example of this model is an energetic person talking to a sleepy person. One's physiological state may affect communication. When a participant in a conversation is sleepy, it may be hard for him to decode messages correctly and make appropriate responses. Without verbal response, the sender cannot be sure that the receiver got the message as intended. Feedback is an important component in the communication process. especially in the interpersonal communication, as it gives a space to clarify misunderstandings. The last but not the least model of communication is the helical model. It has basic elements that are similar to other communication models. However, unlike those models, it promotes an upward or forward movement. It shows that knowledge increases as the interaction goes on. Also, the helical model proposes that communication starts at birth and evolves as one grows up, and that one's responses depend on past experiences. So, there is not only a forward movement in the process, but also some looking back involved. An example of this model is the learning of a new word. When a child learns a new word, he or she learns how to pronounce it and what it means. Later on, he or she may use it in several conversations, several meanings that it can be used in different contexts. His or her experience shows that communication not only evolves but also is dependent on the past. There you have it. Please stay tuned for more discussion on our lesson about the various communication models. We'll be right back after a few reminders from the studio.